Hi folks, welcome back to the Tabletop's Edge. We are picking up today right where we left off last time. We're at the beginning of the action stage here of the March-April 1940 turn. It is the Democrats' impulse. They won initiative last time with a really nice roll. Well, technically the communists edged them out thanks to the +2 modifier for the communist initiative. However, the communists decided they didn't want to go first. They chose to go second, and that allowed the Democrats to go first here, and the fascists were a distant third. Now, the Democrats, and I think to some degree the communists, are hoping that with the fascists going third in the order, that means they will have fewer impulses with which to do things here. The impulse marker is going up 2 after each of the impulses. So even though the weather's really good here, the turn's going to be shortened a little bit because of the weather chart. Now we're going to start off right here in Europe with the looking at the German and Western Allies front lines here. Last turn, the Allies did manage to seal off the penetration the Germans had made, and by winning the initiative this time, or at least going ahead of the fascists, it gives them in effect like a double turn. Now, there's not that much, though, that they're going to be able to do with the double turn at this point. It may not look like it, but they really have, well, at least we'll say they're comfortable with what their defense line looks like right now. The weakest hex they have is up here at Amsterdam with a strength of 7. However, it's in a city, and it is defended on the 3 hex sides facing the Germans by river or crossing arrows, which effectively will have any attackers coming across them. So it's almost as if they have a 14 strength here in the end, and they have a 7th strength down here in the Maginot. So the 2 far ends of the line are the weakest points. The hex here looks rather weak because it's only got 1.5 units. So we've got I think that is the mountain core, and we have an AT unit there. Now the AT unit, it's only a strength 2, but that orange circle means it's going to be doubled in the defense if any armor or mechanized unit attacks. So really we've got a 9 here. However, we have 2 artillery units adjacent to it that would be able to contribute ground support if needed, and that effectively raises the defense strength of that hex to a 14. And there's really nothing the Germans can do to stop those artillery pieces from giving defensive ground support unless they were to ground strike them and invert them. And that's a possibility, but the bombers at this stage of the war for everybody are not all that great outside of a couple of Stuka counters that the Germans have. So would they commit the Stukas to try to flip the artillery piece? Yeah, maybe. But we also have headquarters here, and Prédelat has arrived here in Paris. So there's not a lot of shifting around that I think the Allies are going to have to do to strengthen their line here. Obviously, they would like to add some depth to it, but in order to do that, they're going to need more units. Prédelat, we'll have to think about where we want to put him. We may slide him into this hex, although that makes that hex a very tempting ground strike target for the Germans if we do that. Instead, I may slide him just here, and that would allow him to add some HQ support to either of these 2 hexes, and also, again, provide a little bit of that depth we're looking for. The Commonwealth does have some reinforcements. They've got a militia unit here in London that's basically just sort of garrisoning the capital against any weird German attempts to land there, but I don't think that's really a realistic threat right now. So they may bring them across, and if we look a little bit further westwards, they have a newly arrived infantry corps here that they're planning on sending to France. So there are some Commonwealth ground reinforcements that will be on their way this turn to France. I think for this impulse, the Commonwealth is going to go ahead and do a naval impulse so they can get all of their naval movement out of the way. It will be more cost effective that way by paying the oil for a full naval and getting all their naval moves that they anticipate doing out of the way here, rather than doing some combines and moving things out in bits and pieces. The French are actually going to do a combined rather than a land. They don't have a lot of Like I said, a lot of land moves that they need to do here, and they do have a very nice militia corps down in Senegal that they want to get. There's a transport sitting there. They want to get them loaded up and get them on their way into France, again providing much needed reinforcement. So a combined for the French, a naval for the Commonwealth, and when we get to them eventually, the Chinese, of course, will be doing a land. Rather than have you sort of sit there while I fumble through all of the naval moves and land moves here for the Allies, I'll go ahead and take care of that. Anything interesting happening along the way, of course, I'll stop and show you what's going on there, and then we'll come back once the moves have been completed and you can see where everything has ended up. Well, it turns out we do have something of interest that has popped up during the naval movement phase. As you can see, we're looking at the North Sea here, and the Commonwealth sorted this cruiser group into the 4 box, and then they followed that up by sailing the home fleet along with the Warspite escorting this transport carrying the Manchester militia into the 3 box. When they did that, the 2 German U-boats that are located in the North Sea are going to attempt to intercept that moving force here, this second one here. So to do that, we're going to have to make a search roll for each of the submarines. We'll start with this, the Type 2B that's in the 3 box. These are just small, kind of almost pre-war coastal submarines. They're not very good, but they're here and they're going to see if they can cause some havoc among the Royal Navy. So for the 3 box, we roll the search and it turns out they do intercept. And then the 2 box, however, misses with a 4. So this is good because this is going to allow me to kind of illustrate how the subs versus ships is going to work. We talked a little bit about the way the convoy attacks are going to be handled in the game. So now you can see what happens when the subs attack ships and vice versa. And to do that, I think we'll just sort of move off map for a minute so I can kind of give you a quick rundown on this, and we'll resolve this attack and see what the outcome is. Here we have all of the units involved in this upcoming combat sort of splayed out on the tabletop for you. We have the intercepting submarine over here, and we have all of the units that we're moving as part of that task force. Now, the home fleet actually contains a lot of cruisers, battleships, and aircraft carriers. I've just pulled out HMS Victorious here to be representative of those, as we're not going to need all of those counters, as you will see shortly here. Warspite has been assigned the escort for these transports pretty much from the start of the war, but technically this is all one big group since they are traveling together. Now, instead of resolving this battle as I would using the rules as written in the Collector's Edition, I'm going to be turning back the clock essentially to the old 5th edition rules, because you can see if this were a battle using the rules as written, we'd have a couple of search rolls, and that would give us some surprise points. Unless the German managed to get a lot of surprise points, like at least 4 surprise points to enable them to choose the type of combat, we'd be looking at just a sort of a default surface combat. And in this case, you'd have 1 surface point attacking a lot of ships, granted, but it's going to do almost nothing, and then it's going to just get buried by probably somewhere between 60 and 70 surface points shooting at a single target. It's really it's a suicide scenario for the sub to try and make this attack under the current rules. Now, rolling back to 5th edition, how this works is whenever the submarine intercepts a moving force, it's going to select 1 target out of that entire moving force. It's going to make an attack by rolling a d6 and adding its current box that it occupies. And then the target, regardless of what results were applied to the target will return fire by rolling a d6 and adding its current box to the die roll. And the chart we're going to use for that is this subs versus ships versus subs table from the old 5th edition. These are 2 very simple charts. You can see across the top here, we've got a number of columns that are going to be the modified die roll, and then 3 rows on each chart based on the classification of the target. You can see it breaks down to carriers, heavy surface, light surface, or transports. Now, heavy surface and light surface were how the units were defined prior to the introduction of ships and flames. What I'm going to do is define a heavy surface ship as any SCS with a first cycle build cost of 2. A light surface will be any surface combat ship with a first cycle cost of 1. So it breaks down pretty easily and conveniently. Now, the submarine gets the choice of targets. And in this case, while there are some aircraft carriers out there and a lot of battleships, the submarine's primary task is to prevent these reinforcements from making it to France. So they are going to select the transport as their target, which means they are going to first roll on this bottom row of the top subs versus ships table. And you can see the results range anywhere from 2 to 9. Now that's because back in 5th edition, prior to the new maps with final edition, the C boxes were only numbered 0 to 3 instead of 0 to 4. I'm going to continue that and treat any submarine that's in the 4 box or the 3 box. They're going to max out at a +3 on these tables, as well as the convoy attack table. So what that means is we're going to get a plus. The submarine was in the 3 box. It's going to get a +3 to its die roll, which means we're looking at anywhere from a 4 to a 9 as a result. So they've got a 50-50 chance of inflicting some sort of result on these transports. Anything from an abort to a damage to a sunk. Now, the results here in 5th edition, there were no defense ratings for the ships. The results were applied and the ships were either damaged or sunk. Now, I am going to keep the damage roll, that saving throw, if you will, for ships even in this circumstance. So even if it does inflict an X result on the transport, there is a chance that the transport will merely end up damaged instead of sunk. So let's go ahead and make the roll and see what the result is. They are, of course, hoping for a 7, and they got real close, but this 3 + 3 for the box they're in gives us a 6. You can see that's a miss. So no effect on the transport itself. Now, normally you would have the target then return fire, but with transports, I am going to allow any one of the escorts to make the return shot instead of just the transport. So on this lower chart here that we use when the ships shoot back at the subs, you can see, again, it's carrier for the top row, heavy or light surface, which basically means all SCS will shoot at subs on this row, and then transports on the bottom row. This bottom row, this will only be used if the transports end up finding themselves unescorted for whatever reason. So in this case, I will go ahead and have HMS Victorious with her air units return fire at the submarine. So we're going to use the top row here. And they are in the 3 box, so we're going to add 3 to that. Now you'll notice, unlike the sub chart that goes 2 to 9, the ships versus subs goes all the way up to 11. And that's going to be a case of carriers, when they fire back, going to be giving them either an additional +1 or +2, depending upon the range of the air group that's on the carrier. So if the carrier's air group has a range of 4, 5, or 6, they will get an additional +1 along with whatever box they're in. If it has a 7 or more, it will get an additional +2 to whatever box it's in. Now, if we look at Victorious, this is, of course, early war fleet air arm stuff, so it's got a range of 2, which is going to be a 0 modifier in that case. So we're just going to be a straight up D6 +3 for the carrier shooting back, and you can see that's going to give us a result between 4 and 9. There's a much better chance of the carrier doing something to the submarine than we had of the submarine doing something to the transports. They roll a 1, which I think is going to be the sub's lucky day. That's 1 + 3 is a 4. That is also no result. So the submarines were able to find themselves in the path. They were able to maneuver, take a shot. They missed, and the Royal Navy either didn't even notice or were unable to track them down. So in this case, both sides lived to fight another day. However, because the submarine attempted an interception and successfully intercepted, it's going to be turned face down. It'll still remain in the 3 box, but it will no longer be able to initiate any interceptions. If you recall, the other submarine that was in the 2 box failed to successfully intercept, so it remains face up, and it can then attempt to intercept any future forces that are moving through the sea zone. So little explanation of how we're working the subs versus ships versus sub stuff to go along with the kind of the throwback version of the rules for the convoy attack. Hope you'll find this interesting. For me, it gives the subs a little bit of a chance of doing something much more so than were we using the collector's edition raw. I think it was a very unfortunate change to the sub rules when they introduced ships in flames back in late 5th edition, right before final edition. I much prefer the earlier way, and hopefully this playthrough will give those of you who didn't have the opportunity to play 5th edition to see what those rules were like and see what you think about them, compare them to your experiences with the current rule set. So let's get back to the map and we'll continue pressing on through the turn. Back on map here, I have run through the rest of the impulse for the Western Allies. You can see up here we've got the face-up submarine that failed the interception. Here's the stack that was intercepted and the face-down submarine there for the Kriegsmarine. In France itself, we did move Prédelet east of Paris 1 hex, and we also rebased the fighters there with their 4 range. This will give them an interception capability from Wavell basically down here to Biot and the Bordeaux militia. So they'll be able to help contest any air battles over the central portion, central sector of the front. But other than that, not much going on. The Commonwealth do have now a couple of land units in position ready to land in France. They've got the militia in the North Sea, and they also have that infantry corps that was here in Plymouth decided to sail into the Bay of Biscay rather than risk any potential interception there with the submarines. So it's getting ready to next impulse move ashore. The Sydney militia was brought in last turn by the Queens, and the Queens have, where did they go? They sorted, I think they're right here and just kind of hanging out in the Bay of Biscay, waiting to see where they're going to rebase to. They are fast enough. They're not quite fast enough to get all the way out to Auckland this turn where the New Zealand militia unit arrived. They're going to be 1 sea zone short, so it would be a 2-turn trip to get out there and most likely a 2-turn trip to get back, which would put the Auckland militia arriving basically the end of the year. And between now and then, the Commonwealth plan on receiving a lot more ground units, a lot closer than that militia. So they hate to have the Queens basically tied up and out of commission with that task for the rest of the year. So there's probably going to end up rebasing back to the Commonwealth or maybe down to Gibraltar where they're in a little more central location and able to head either back to the UK to pick up reinforcements or out to Canada even, or over to the Pacific if some Australians or Indians show up. So that's where things stand for the Western Allies here at the end of their first impulse. Let's hop over to China and we'll see what the Chinese are going to do with their first impulse. The Chinese are grateful for being able to win initiative this turn. They were fairly hard pressed last turn with the Japanese attacks in the south. Now they are dealing with fine weather, unfortunately, everywhere again, at least this impulse, but the hope is that the rains will come early here in the North Monsoon area, which will really sort of hamper and effectively shut down that section of the front for this turn, and then hopefully on through May, June, and July, August, allowing them to continue to build up some reinforcements and focus more on the central section of the front here. They did get a couple of good, well, at least good for Chinese nationalist reinforcements this turn. But the one is not very mobile. This garrison unit here in Kuaiyang, if he moves anywhere, he's going to be turned face down. And the other one, who's got a good movement rate, again, for Chinese forces is unfortunately stuck up here in the Chungking Plateau up in the mountains. So if he's going to get anywhere useful, he's going to end up moving into a mountain hex and being turned face down. That's going to finish him for the turn, right? So since we don't really have much of a choice, I think we will, and we'll bring him down here. And now the question is, with the garrison here in Kunming, do we leave them there in the city, or do we try and move them forward a little bit closer to the front lines? You know what? I am going to do that. I think we're going to move there and be turned face down. Now, we are thin in the south here with just a single militia unit, the Canton militia, here in this clear hex on the coast with a couple of hexes it can be attacked from. We also have the forest hex to the north of it here, which has a resource. We'd like to hold on to it. The defenders there are currently a 5-3 and a 1-5 cavalry division. So a 6 defense strength is actually pretty good for the Chinese, at least right now. We can either move the Kunming militia in here, but he will be turned face down, which would give any attack, which can come from these 2 hexes, a +1 on that hex. I don't think we want to do that. So instead, maybe we'll slide them here in a race to see if they can get into this hex before the Japanese attack or decide to attack and try and kill the militia unit there. I think that's about all the Chinese can do. Unfortunately, Chang is kind of stuck up here in Wuhan with a decent defensive unit. They do have some rivers defending the city as well. The problem is, I'd love to get Chang out and get him down here to what I think is the more important sector of the front. But if I pull him out, then we've got a single unit defending there, and the Japanese can attack from 3 hexes. With only a single defending unit, it's a lot easier to take a hex, as we've seen over in Metz in France earlier in the game. So for now, I think Chang's just going to have to sit tight and hold on here at Wuhan, and we'll see how the situation develops in the south. Ultimately, the Japanese have the initiative, and they'll be the ones determining what's going to be going on here in China for the foreseeable future. And the Chinese are just, unfortunately, only in a position where they can react to the Japanese move. So that's going to wrap up the Chinese turn, that's going to wrap up the Chinese impulse, which will do it for the Democrats. We'll move on to the communists. The communists, if we move a little bit here to the west, the communists are still sort of wrapping up their conquest of Iran. There's not going to be much going on here. They are limited to a combined impulse because they are neutral, but they will basically be leaving a garrison here in Iran and then pretty much shifting everybody else somewhere where they can be more useful. Probably Europe, if I had to guess. So I'm just going to go ahead and take care of the communist impulse off camera, and then because there won't really be anything of interest to see there. And then we will get right to the fascists, and we'll probably go ahead and start in Europe with the Germans and the Italians. We'll begin the fascist impulse here in Europe with the Germans. We're looking, of course, at the front lines here between Germany and the Allies. And Germany's in kind of a bit of a tough spot. I mean, this is a critical impulse and it seems like every impulse for the last couple of turns and probably for the next few turns is going to be even more important than the impulse that preceded it. And Germany does have a superiority in terms of ground power. They've got more land units, or at least as many land units, and their land units are better for the most part than the French and Commonwealth ground units, but they don't have a big enough superiority to where they can make several high odds attacks every impulse, or really even every turn. So they have an advantage, but it's not an overwhelming advantage on the ground. In the air, it's a similar situation. They have far more ground support factors in terms of bombers than the Allies do. They also have an edge in fighter cover over the front, but it's not total air supremacy. And as we've seen just last turn with some of the air battles, even though the Allies may be outnumbered in the air, they still have the potential to inflict some losses and disrupt Luftwaffe capabilities. So the Germans, looking at this, they've got a tough decision to make. Despite the fact that they've been pushing the Allies back here in southern Belgium and the northern end of the Maginot, the Allies still have a fairly respectable front line of defense running from Switzerland all the way to the coast. Now, Germany has to kind of make up her mind and make a decision whether they're going to try to just make one attack where they throw everything they can into that attack to try to get as high an odds attack as they can and therefore get a reasonable guarantee of success. But in so doing, are going to sort of shoot their bolt there and then leave themselves without the ability to make any decent attacks for the rest of the turn. You know, they grab that one hex and then kind of be content with that. Or do they want to try to find a way to use what they've got a little bit more efficiently and make some attacks that may not have the same guarantee of success, but have the potential to allow the Germans to make multiple attacks over the turn and try and pick up 2 or 3 or 4 hexes and really just blow the Allied line wide open. So, you know, it's those kind of decisions that I think sets WiF apart from all the other grand strategic games out there. We're looking at almost like an operational level type of decision that the Germans are having to make here in how they conduct their attack into France. And I don't recall the same kind of feeling or decisions in, say, like Advanced Third Reich. Granted, it's been a long time since I played that system, or even Axis Empires, which is an excellent game. I really love Axis Empires, but it's not WiF. And so it's really WiF where you find a grand strategic game where the military element of the game is, I think, more detailed than you find in any other grand strategic game, and therefore you get, like I said, almost more of an operational feel when you're playing through the game. Which, again, that's one of the things that I think sets WiF apart, and really, you know, is a reason why I've continued to play it over all these years. So, in looking things over, I don't think it's incorrect to say that the Sedan hex right here is probably the key hex, at least right now, in the situation. They still have the Meuse River here protecting the east, so any Germans attacking from this hex are going to be halved. However, with the big attack last turn, where they rolled extremely well, that enabled the Germans to pick up not one but 2 hexes here, which will not be halved attacking Sedan here. Now, this is a fairly powerful hex. You see the 2 artillery there. They've got Georges with a 4 strength and a 5 infantry. So that's going to be a defense strength of 11. They've got an artillery unit here, which can make that 14. They also have Biot here, who could, if necessary, contribute his defensive headquarters support to any attack here. And then, perhaps just as importantly, we mentioned the terrain of the river, but they're also in the forest, which means all of the ground support factors that the Luftwaffe might bring are going to be halved, which is kind of a big deal. I mean, that, given the number of bombers that the Germans have on map now, that's potentially an entire odds shift, really, that the woods is providing. So, if this is the linchpin of the at least the French sector of the front, that's probably the hex the Germans may want to focus on. But if they do, it's going to take, like I said, everything they've got. They're going to have to commit to this one attack. And if it fails, that's going to basically stuff them probably for the whole turn. Even if they do succeed, they probably don't stand to capture more than just this single hex. And then they're going to be done, I think, in this whole area, this sector of the front, certainly, if not everywhere, for the turn. Now, another issue complicating the Germans' decision on how to prosecute this offensive is the weather. We are in March, April. The weather should theoretically be better than it is in January, February, although we had a really, really mild January, February. but there's still a reasonable chance of bad weather occurring here in March, April. Bad weather is going to really hamper the Luftwaffe. So even if the Germans do sort of hold back for potential attacks in future impulses, they may not get the opportunity to launch those attacks if the weather turns bad on them, and then the turn ends quickly. Now, right now, the French, as we've seen, are sort of in a little bit of a fiscal crisis. They've not been able to afford to build any units, so they're not getting any reinforcements on map the last couple of turns, and they probably won't get anything next turn, which means every French unit that gets killed and sent to the force pool is not coming back anytime soon. And that will allow the Germans to wear them down and thin them out, and eventually something's going to pop. So there's an argument for, let's make as many attacks as we can at decent odds, not necessarily good odds, but decent odds, in hopes that we at least just kill something that France can't immediately replace, because the Germans will be able to win that battle along the attritional curve, if you will. So a lot for the Germans to consider right now. And they are going to be doing a land impulse. We know that much. So they're doing a land impulse, and they are paying the one oil to basically fuel the entire impulse. Beyond that, it's probably going to take a few minutes to really look things over, make some tough decisions, and then proceed. So what I think I'll do here is I'll do all the hemming and hawing off camera, probably do the land movement, get everything sort of set up, and then we'll pick back up once the Germans are sort of in position to make whatever attacks they have decided they're going to try and do this impulse. So we'll be back here in just a split second for you guys, and oh God, several minutes, maybe an hour for me. So we'll see you in just a minute. We're rejoining the action a little earlier than I anticipated. We're actually in the ground strike missions step of the German impulse. And after evaluating several different possibilities of what to do this turn, it does appear that the Germans have decided that they really want to grab the Sedan hex, because they think that's going to give them a lot more possibilities moving forward, whether it's this turn or next turn. Now, next turn being May, June, it's a summer turn. There's going to be good weather. It should be a nice long turn. So the Germans I think, have decided that they're willing to accept fewer gains this turn in order to set themselves up, or be more sure of being in a position at the start of next turn to really maximize that May, June turn and do as much damage as they can. So to that end, and some of the possibilities they looked at included an attack here on Brussels. You can see they've got 4 hexes on Brussels, although these 2 hexes would be attacking across a river. It would take out a couple of the Belgian units, and it would take the capital. I believe the factories, all the factories, which would be in Liège here, and I think there might be one in Brussels. It would actually result in Belgium's conquest, which would remove, I think there's a Belgian unit here, there's some naval units there, kind of take them out of the Allied order of battle. And it was tempting, because they could probably get an okay attack there, but again, it's not a great attack, and it's really not moving them closer to the ultimate goal here of Paris. So instead of converging on Brussels this impulse, they're going to go ahead and focus here on Sedan. And to that end, they've decided to launch some ground strike missions. Now, with a land impulse, the Germans' activities are limited to only 4 air moves. So they have 4 ground strike missions. The ground strike missions count against those activity limits. So we've got 2 aircraft in the Sedan hex, and we have 2 aircraft here just south of it, hoping to neutralize Biot. If these guys get lucky and end up turning Georges face down, then we can sort of take the defensive headquarters support off the table at least. But ultimately, we're hoping just to turn a couple of units face down here, which will give us +1s in the attack. And again, here we're hoping to turn the headquarters face down. So the point we're at right at this moment is it is now the Allies' turn to decide whether or not they are going to attempt to intercept any or either of the missions here. Now the Allies have 4 fighters on map, here, 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 and here. And you can see the best frontline fighter they're going to have is a 4. Losing the Spitz, having them shot down last turn, was a bit of a blow. And interestingly enough, all 4 of the units can intercept the hex over Sedan, but only the southern 2 aircraft units are in a position to intercept the bombers over Biot. So what the Allies don't want to do is sort of fritter away their fighter force in little penny packets. They are outnumbered by the Germans. However, if they can mass their fighters, they've got a better chance of getting some result, whether that's sneaking through some of their bombers in a defensive ground support role, or perhaps turning back some of the German bombers on their missions. And I think, given that we only have 2 aircraft that can intercept this hex, I think they're just going to have to write that off. We're just going to have to grin and bear it here and see how the German bombers do, because I don't want to send half of our fighters here. The Germans have a ton of fighters that are within easy range of this hex and can intercept the interceptors, putting them at a real big disadvantage, and still have enough fighters left over to handle whatever the other 2 Allied fighters, if they decide to do something either against this ground strike mission or later in the impulse if the Germans end up attacking, which they almost certainly will. So with that in mind, I think the Allies are going to sort of husband their fighter forces now. They're going to let these ground strikes go through, especially considering that this is a forest hex. So these bombers' tactical values are going to be halved. You can see the top one is a 3. That's going to be a 1.5. That's going to be halved to 1.5. That's going to round to 2, and then the one underneath is a 5. But again, that's going to be halved to 2.5, and then that 2.5 is going to round up to a 3. So the Germans are striking with a 2 and a 3 here. Yeah, it's not ideal to just let them go in, but the Allies, I think, are banking on when the attack comes, they're going to be flying some of their own ground support in, and the Germans have some more bombers back here that I'm sure they would like to add, and it may mean the difference between an odds shift or 2 even. So the end result is the Allies are going to go ahead and let these 2 ground strike missions go unintercepted. And if that's the case, let's just go ahead and resolve them real quick here. We'll start with the southern hex. You see we have a 4 and a 4, so 2 4s. They're not going to be modified for terrain or anything else. We have 2 units, Biot and the infantry. So with both bombers being a 4, I'll just roll 2 dice, 1 for each of the bombers, because they're going to get 1 shot at each unit. So we'll start at the top. We'll roll 2 dice, looking for a 4 on either one to turn Biot face down. And they get a 3 and a 9, so that will do it. He will be face down. And now for the infantry corps underneath, again looking for a 4 on either die. They get a 5 and another 3. So the ground strikes were successful, and both of the units here will be turned face down. That's not the headquarters being turned face down is of immediate concern. However, if the Germans do get lucky in their attack here, this hex may become pretty vulnerable, because now any attacks made on this hex are going to get a +2 because both of those units are face down. Now for the sort of the focus of the German attack, we're looking at as we said, a 3 with the Stuka and a 2 for the Dornier 17s. We've got these a little bit different. There are 3 units in the hex. We've got the artillery, we've got Georges, and an infantry unit on the bottom. So I guess what we'll do is I'll roll the red die will be the Stuka, the green die will be the Dorniers, and we'll go top to bottom again. So first 2 dice against the artillery, we're looking for a 3 on the green and a 2 on the red. I'm sorry, a 3 on the red and a 2 on the green, and we did get a 1 on the red die, so that'll turn the artillery face down. Now for the big one, if we can turn Georges face down, there will be no possibility of defensive HQ support, which is a plus +1 or -1 potential difference. And for here, the headquarters is safe. Both of them miss with a 10 for the Stuka and a 7 for the Dornier. And now for the bottom one, the Germans would like to get this just to give them a +2. And we'll see what happens here. We have a 7 red and a 3 green. If it had been reversed, they would have gotten the bottom one as well, but that's not to be. So those attacks, I think the Allies will take it because that's probably about the best they could hope for. Only the artillery is turned face down there. That will provide the Germans a +1, but for now at least, they still have a headquarters here, which should be able to offset any offensive HQ support. Let me go ahead and rebase these aircraft, and now the next step is going to be rail movement, then land movement. So I'll take care of all that, and I don't see anything happening again until we get up to the land combat phase. So we will resume with the combat phase here in just a moment. Well, it's the moment of truth for the Germans, at least in the current impulse. They've moved some units around. They toyed briefly with the idea of attacking this hex, this impulse instead, but looking things over, I think they remain committed to trying to take Sedan here. And they are going to attack from these 3 hexes. Now, right now, they have 19 in this hex, 16 in this hex for a total of 35, and 18 in this hex, but it is going to be halved by the river to 9. So that's a total of 44 attacking a defensive strength of 11. So it's right at 4-1. However, we need to add in some ground support and HQ support potentially. The Germans are going to fly 2 bombers in, and they're going to escort those bombers with this fighter. The Allies, this is kind of what they've been saving their Air Force for. They have 2 bombers, really 1 fighter bomber here, which they will send. 1, 2, 3. Yes, he's got the range, as do the MEO 143s. And they will go ahead and send in the remaining 4 fighters. So they are committing all of their Air Force here to try to bring the odds down from the 44-11, bring it back down to something like a 3-1 or maybe even a 2-1 would be even better. And given that the Allies have just committed basically their entire Air Force, that frees up the Germans to go ahead and intercept those interceptors or those bombers with pretty much the rest of their fighter strength as well. What do you see here? A gigantic air battle brewing. And the question, well, yeah, let's go ahead and send these guys too. The question the Germans have, do they want to send these Bf-110Cs into the fight? And I don't think so, because as you can see, they do have a 3 TAC, which is really pretty good for this stage of the war. So they may, they're just going to go ahead and rely on the tremendous number of fighters as well as the qualitative advantage they have. They're committing, I believe, 2 6s in addition to at least 1 5 in there, while the best the Allies can muster is a 4. So this is an air battle which, as you can see, is going to be clearly the biggest we've yet seen in the game. This will take probably a few rounds to resolve. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. As we've seen previously, the Luftwaffe's performance in the air has been sort of up and down. But I think the Germans are going to retain the 110s here, which will give them some flexibility for the rest of the turn, and they'll just hope to get at least 1 more impulse of decent weather. So with a huge air battle taking place here, let's go ahead and I'll pull the aircraft off. We'll put them over to find a convenient spot on the table where we can get them all laid out, and we'll go ahead and resolve this big air fight. All right, here we see both sides deployed for the coming battle. This, as you can see by the sheer number of aircraft involved, is the largest battle we've seen in the air thus far in the war. As a reminder, the front fighter is going to be the one considered to be closest to the enemy. So this is the Germans' front bomber, the Germans' front fighter, Allies' front fighter, Allies' front bomber. The air value, to calculate that, the Allies have a 4 for the Hurricanes as their front fighter. They're going to add 0.4, 0.4, and 0.2 to give them a total air-to-air value of 5. On the German side, they start off with a 6. We're going to add 0.6, 0.5, and 0.5 for a total of 7.6, then 0.4 for 8, 0.3, and 0.3 for a final total of 8.6. We subtract 5 from 8.6, we get plus 3.6, which means the Germans are going to round up to 4. They will be rolling on the plus 4 and plus 5 column, which is a pretty decent column. For the Allies, they are going to take 5 and subtract 8.6, which gives them negative 3.6. That's going to round up or round down, however you want to look at it, to a minus 4. That'll put them on the minus 3 to minus 4 column. And both sides have deployed their fighters to give them maximum air-to-air value over time. So what I mean by that is as the front fighters get shot down or aborted, they'll still be able to bring their highest possible air-to-air value into the next round of combat. Now, for the Allies, what they are trying to do is get these 2 bombers, if possible, both bombers, through and into provide some ground support. They are using the 3-strength artillery unit that's adjacent to the Hex as ground support as well. I don't think I mentioned that earlier, but they are committing that as ground support. There's nothing the Germans can do about that, so that's going to get through. It is going to be halved, just like any air factor would be because of the terrain. So it's going to contribute 1.5 to the 11 in the Hex, giving the total defensive strength of 12.5 right now. So as the battle stands now, before we get to anything in the air, it's 44 to 12.5, which is enough to drop it from that 4-1 down to a 3-1 plus 1. Question is, if the Allies can get both of these bombers through and deny the Germans either of those Heinkel bombers, they may be able to drop it down to a 2-1. So let's see, will the Allies be able to sort of punch above their weight here in the air yet again, or are they going to get crushed by what looks to be a fairly solid superiority on the part of the Germans? So as the inactive player, since it's the Germans' impulse, the Allies will roll first, and they'll be rolling first on the minus 3-4 column, and it's really kind of the worst that they could hope for here. They rolled an 11, which is a DC. Defender clears through any 1 bomber. Now, that's not necessarily a huge deal because, again, what the Allies are looking to do is try to get their bombers through. So they would like to see the Germans reciprocate by rolling an 11 on their upcoming roll. Any opportunity to chip away at German air strength in the air by shooting something down would be great, but they're not off to a real good start. Let's see what the Germans return fire with on the plus 4-5 column, which is getting up there. That's a pretty good column. And, well, wouldn't you know it, the Germans do kindly return to favor by also rolling an 11. I don't think I've seen that in a while. So an 11 on the plus 4-5 column is defender clears through any 1 bomber. So they will go ahead and bring the fighter bombers through. And at the end of the first round of combat, it looks like the fighters really haven't shown up yet, as both sides are able to get a bomber through that will contribute to the fight. What that's going to do, with now that the fighter bombers have gotten through, they're going to add another 1.5. So we're looking at total defensive strength of 14 right now. The attackers have 44, so it's still a 3-1, which gives the Allies reason to stick around and try to sneak these amio bombers through in this second round, hopefully. So with no losses to the front fighters, neither side is going to be aborting the combat. We're rolling once again on the minus 3-4 and the plus 4+5. So here goes the second round with the Allied second attack roll. And wow, that's interesting. That's another 11, which is going to be a DC yet again. So both of the German bombers get through. Not quite sure where the Allied fighters are, but the Germans now are hoping to draw some blood here. Let's see what they do. They roll a little better, but not much. They roll a 9. Now a 9 on the plus 4+5 is in fact a DA result. That's a defender aborts front fighter or front bomber. So now the Allies have a choice to make. If they abort the amio, that's going to remove any reason for them to remain in the air. It's also going to guarantee the Germans a 3-1 attack. If they abort their front fighter here, the Hurricane, things are going to be a little bit worse next round. I don't know if they'll be on the -5 column or not. Let's see, that would be a 4.6 to an 8.6. Looks like it would be, again, just a straight up +4, -4. So no change on the columns there. Do the Allies want to press their luck and see if maybe they can shoot down a German fighter, perhaps, or have the Germans, since nobody's rolling particularly well thus far in the combat, maybe see if the Germans do them a favor and clear that bomber through? This is tough because 3-1, 2-1, that's a big deal. I think the Allies do have some air reinforcements, specifically Commonwealth reinforcements, showing up next turn. I think what they'll do is maybe just have to settle for locking in the 3-1 with getting the bombers through, rather than risk it could go sideways in a real hurry with such a dramatic air-to-air differential. And the French can't really afford to lose anything. So at this point, the Allies have managed to come up, challenge the Luftwaffe, and then get everybody to return safely. I think we're just going to call it there. The Allies will go ahead and abort the mission, but they do get, like I say, one of their bombers through, and we'll see. Let's see that it's actually, with both of those Germans getting through, that's going to be now a 46, and it was 12.5, 13, 40. So it's still going to be a 3-1, no harm, no foul. Well, a fairly indecisive, or at least a bloodless combat, despite the massive size of it. Surprised me a little bit, but the dice rolls just weren't there. Again, the Luftwaffe seems to be underperforming, if you were to ask me. But now we need to return all of these aircraft to base, and we will then resolve the actual ground attack. We'll do the defensive HQ support, then we'll resolve the ground attack and see what happens. Back on map, we have returned to base all of the aircraft that were involved in the battle. We're also going to turn the artillery unit face down that is providing defensive ground support. And then we're moving on to HQ support. The Germans will have Rundstedt, who is located here, provide offensive HQ support with his 4. However, the French will answer with Georges providing his 3 for defensive HQ support. Subtracting the 3 from the 4 leaves 1. Divided by 4 is 0.25. It's going to round down to 0. It's not going to be enough to give an additional +1 to the Germans. So after all is said and done, we have 46 factors attacking, 14 defensive factors. That's going to round to 3-1, +1 for the face down artillery unit. On the blitz table, the Germans are going to select the blitz table. 3-1 +1, they have a 70% chance of success, and success is going to be defined as taking the hex. Obviously, the Germans would love to kill everybody in the hex, keep all their guys face up, and just keep on trucking for the rest of the turn, but at a bare minimum, they need to take the hex. And even so, with that 70% chance of success, there's still a 30% chance overall of the Germans suffering a loss. And because we're on the blitz table, that means that loss is going to be one of their nice expensive armor or mechanized units. So here we go, yet another big attack from the Germans. And they roll, I think they roll well enough here. That 7 is a good roll. That +1 is going to turn it into an 8. So the Germans are going to take no losses. They are going to keep half of their attackers face up, and the French are going to suffer a B, a breakthrough result. But somewhat importantly, they're not suffering any actual unit losses. So the Germans have succeeded in taking the hex, and that's I think a huge relief for them. But weirdly enough, this whole attack was a bloodless attack. There were no losses in the air combat and no losses on the ground. Now, for the French, that's pretty important because they can't afford to really replace anything. What's going to happen to these 3 units is they're going onto the production circle to arrive as reinforcements next turn. So as long as this turn isn't terribly long, those guys should be able to get back in the fight. Now, the Germans are going to need to advance into the hex, and I think what they're going to do, we've got 9 units attacking, so we're going to leave, that's half of those, that would round up to 5, so we'll leave 5 units face up, and I think we're going to leave these 2 face up. We're going to leave this division behind in the forest here with the aircraft, And then I think we're going to advance this 2-strength division. Runstead, he's going to be turned face down, as will the armor here. And need to put this fighter back, and then we'll turn the artillery unit here face down, and that'll leave these 3 and the 2 corps in that hex face up. So that's what we're looking like after yet another big important German attack. This could change things here moving forward now that the Germans have finally started to clear the river line. They're not entirely clear of it because this hex here still is on the Meuse, but they're getting into some open ground in front of them, and they are, another hex closer to Paris here. If they can get a long turn with some good weather here in March, April, they can really set themselves up to do some damage and maybe finish France off as early as next turn. It'll depend. Remember, the Commonwealth does have some ground units that are going to be arriving in France this turn. We'll see if they can rush them to the front in time to stop the Germans. But what you're seeing here so far, the Germans have been slowly sort of clawing their way. They've been successful at it for the most part, but they're clawing their way just hex by hex by hex. And it's one of the knocks on WiF is that it doesn't really handle the France 40 campaign very well, I don't think. Now, granted, we're in a Days of Decision combined game. Granted, this is spring 1940, coincidentally enough, but when you play just pure WiF, that France 40 campaign feels a lot more like the slogging, attritional, positional type of warfare of World War I rather than it does World War II. And I think it's probably one of the weaker spots in WiF. Now, it's not enough, I think, to destroy the enjoyment of the game, but I have seen plenty of WiF games over the years die in France in the summer and fall of 1940. If the Germans get bogged down there in the fall of 1940, it usually means a game over sometime in late 41, maybe early 42. It's really not as fun, I think, for everyone, allies included, as a game where you see Germany take France out in 1940. And because at that point, I think, is really when I think the game gets going, So we'll see what happens here. There's a lot of different circumstances and things factoring into this particular campaign in France. We'll see if the Germans can continue to chip away until eventually the Allies break and maybe they can grab Paris and install Vichy. But that is all in the future. What we need to do now is shift a little bit further to the southwest. We're going to take a look and see if the nationalists can continue to have some success down in Spain. In Spain, the Civil War has reached kind of an interesting situation here. For a while now, the Republicans have been kind of penned up in this eastern bastion based on Valencia, and they still have 9 defensive factors in Valencia itself, which, because of the mountains, is actually defensive 18. They also have the same situation here in Malaga. Again, it's fully stacked. They have 9 combat factors there in the mountains for defensive 18. Now, the nationalists have their entire force pool on the map right now. So everything that can be on the map is on the map. And yet, with all of that, the best they can really bring against either of the 2 strongholds in the south and the east for the Republicans is a 3-2, maybe a 2-1. So really not very good odds. The Republicans last turn sallied this infantry corps out of Malaga, and it actually managed to beat the nationalists, who were really focused over here in the east, to this resource hex here, which means starting this turn, as long as they can hold on to what they have, they'll be getting 3 build points. That's enough to start building infantry corps. And so we may see the Republicans start to become resurgent on the map. It's probably going to be a bit before they can actually start to become offensive and go after the nationalists. But what we're looking at is the potential for this somewhat of a stalemate to really turn into a big stalemate. And this war may never end at this rate. So the nationalists obviously want to avoid that. They've got the Republicans basically down on the mat, and they want to keep them from getting back up. Now, to attack here, they're going to need to shift a number of units around, and the nationalists are still under the Italian activities limits. The Italians being neutral means the Italians are doing it combined, and they only get 3 land moves. Now, fortunately for the nationalists, the Italians are quite content to let the nationalists use all 3 of those land moves, but I don't think it's quite enough for the nationalists to get everything they need here to get an attack off against Valencia this impulse. They're also not really happy about this infantry corps out here. So I think what they're going to do, it may smack a little bit of desperation, but they are going to move these 2 units out here. And with their final land move from the Italians, they are going to move this motorized corps into this mountain hex here. And what this move out here does is it brings the Blue Division along with an infantry corps of 3 strength. It's a total of 4. If we add in the garrison here, which is also 4, the defenders have 4 in the mountains, of course, doubles them to 8. This would be like a 1-to-1 on the assault, and it's not a very good attack. It's not an attack I would normally recommend, but if the nationalists can take out this infantry corps, retake the resource hex there, then that will drop the Republicans back down to a production of only 2, which is really limits what they're able to build out of the force pool. So it's pretty ugly on the 1-to-1. If with no modifiers or anything like that, a 1 could see all 3 of those nationalist units destroyed, which, you know, it's not a horrible thing. Like I said, their force pool is currently empty. They do have a number of build points that they have available, at least until or unless the Republicans start retaking a lot of those on the map. So I think the nationalists are willing to take that risk. In return, what they need, they really, they only have a 40% chance of killing this guy, unless, well, no, they're not going to be able to do that. So yeah, let's just go for it. Let's see. They're looking for something really high here. Hopefully they can emulate the Germans the way they've been rolling, and they do not. A 2 on the assault at 1-to-1 is attacker loses 2, defender loses none. And I think what we'll do is we'll take the Blue Division, of course, and we'll take this infantry corps as well. So a rather bloody, some might say pointless attack there in the mountains on the Republicans results in nothing but a couple of dead nationalist corps. Now, the nationalists have been using almost all of the Italian land activities for most of the game, or at least since the Civil War has begun. The Italians, whenever I play the European Axis, my Italians tend to be, I think, a little bit too passive, and I don't know if that's a case of just my natural conservative bent or not having a real solid plan on what to do with them in most games. I suspect they should be more active than they are, but it's all about timing their entry into the war. They are fairly vulnerable because it is a relatively weak major power. And of course, in the current situation here in this game, there's really nothing for the Italians. There's no real reason for them to kind of jump in actively into the war. Germany seems to be doing okay against the French and Commonwealth. Obviously, Germany would absolutely welcome any help from the Italians, but the Italians are actually still eyeing up Spain. And I think what they've been wanting to do now, I think for a couple of turns and just haven't been able to because of some other higher priority political options, is they want to start giving more direct aid to the nationalists. It doesn't do the nationalists much good to continue to give them build points. They've got plenty of build points. What they lack are units that they can put on map. And so far, the Italians have only contributed a single weak infantry corps to the nationalists' cause. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw later this year, or perhaps in a not too distant future, the Italians actually sending more units, lending more volunteer units to the nationalists to kind of help put them over the edge against the Republicans. Whether that be more air units or more land units remains to be seen. Of course, the Italians have to actually get in a position where they can select a political option to do. Of course, like everybody else, I think they're pretty interested in gearing up. So I don't know that the nationalists can count on any help anytime soon. But who knows? Maybe by the end of summer, there'll be more Italians on the ground in Spain. The question is, will it be too late to stop a potential Republican resurgence? With that, I think we're going to leave Europe and we're going to head over to the Pacific and see what the Japanese are doing. Over in Asia, Japan would like to continue pressing here in the south while they still have some good weather. They know the monsoon rains are coming. They've got a maybe this turn, maybe the next turn, if that, before weather is going to kind of shut down this whole southern area. And they'd like to take Canton here before the rains set in. So this turn, they're going to be focusing, I think, on pressing hard here in the south. Now, it is did want to note that the limited war, which was created by Japanese selecting political option Japanese 6 as their method for going to war with China, that limited period of limited war that's been imposed has now ended. So the Japanese are free to select land impulses, naval, combined, or air. Now, in this particular impulse, they're going to choose another combined. They're going to and they're going to pay the 7/10 oil, which they've paid from their stockpile here in Hiroshima, to fully fuel everything. Let's see, how many do we have here? Do we have? Nope. All right. So we will be moving a couple of units out from here. From the 2 box. We're going to pick up these guys in Fukuoka, and they're going on the transports here. I think we'll put them in the 2 boxes, fine. They're not going to be invading anywhere. They'll just be debarking, I think, later at the end of the turn. Do we have anything else we want to do? Yeah, why not? Let's see, is this Kitabutai? Yeah, we'll send Kitabutai out to the 4 box. All right, there's our 2. No port attacks, there's no naval air missions. That's our naval movement. Let's see, Japan does, in fact, get 2 naval moves in a combined. Moving on, I don't see any strategic bombardment or ground strike missions. Rail movement, no, I don't think they're going to do any rail movement. Now we'll get to the land movement. We've got, I believe it's 3 for the Japanese in a combined. It is indeed, at least until 1945. So we're going to hold off on those land moves. We'll go to air transport. Now we'll debark land units from sea. And I think we're going to debark these 3. Whoops, these 3. And we're going to just have them debark here in Shanghai. As you can see, there are some partisans that have popped up here in eastern China. And we don't really want to let them start running amok and interfering with things. So the Japanese, I think, for this impulse are just going to focus on eliminating the threat from the partisans here, although they hate to give up a good weather impulse down here. But first things first, no invasions, pair drops. So it is land combat. We will make 1 attack. We've got 5, 8, 9, and with Kido Butai out here, we are going to have one of their carrier planes, or CAGs as my group likes to refer to them, lend some ground support. So we've got a 1 ground support that's going to give us 9, plus 1 is 10. Defensive strength is 1. It's a 10-to-1 on the assault, which is an automatic asterisk 2S. So the aircraft will return to the carrier, turn face down. We will remove the partisans, and the question is, do we want to enter the advance into the hex? Yeah, why not? We'll just put the Marines here. They can be easily picked up from there on the coast. And I think, no, we don't have any air rebases. I don't see any reorganization required. That's going to do it for a fairly short Japanese impulse. However, if they, like I said, if they can continue to get some good weather, particularly in the south, I expect to see them get a little more aggressive here. And again, right now they're eyeing the major port of Canton down here. That is going to wrap it up, though, for the Axis powers, their first impulse. We're going to move the marker up 2 boxes. Again, there's no chance of the turn ending here after the fascist first impulse, nor will there be after the Democrats' next impulse. Let's go ahead and roll weather and see what the weather is going to look like this next turn. We've got a weather roll of 3, which I don't think is good. March, April, no, not really. We're going to have snow in the Arctic and North Temperate, interestingly. Rain in the Med and North Monsoon, so much for the good weather down here. Did the Japanese, did they blow their opportunity to continue pushing westwards here? If so, then I think those partisans certainly did their job basically buying a whole turn for China. It's going to be storm in South Monsoon and rain in South Temperate. The marker is going to go up 3 after each impulse. So with the snow, that won't affect the movement capabilities of the Allies. So they're probably pretty happy with the snow result, because that is going to give 2 odd shifts against, it'll be a reduction of 2 odd shifts in the attacks that the Germans make. So that should bring the German attacks to a stop, at least for this impulse. I think, though, that we've been going at this for about an hour, maybe a little more at this point. So to keep this, again, from getting too big and to enable me to get it uploaded in a more timely fashion, I think we're going to wrap up this episode here. It was a rather consequential episode over in Europe with the big German attack there at Sedan that managed to take the Hex. And we'll pick up next episode with the Democrats' impulse. It's going to be a bad weather impulse, I'm thinking, or I expect, particularly with the marker going up 3 boxes after each impulse. I suspect that the next episode will be able to wrap up March, April 1940, and then we'll get on into the summer in May, June. So that's going to do it for today. We'll see you next time. Take care.